And I work with a lot of women and have worked with a lot of women over the years. Most, if not all of the women who I work with have been experiencing just an inability to stay out of toxic relationships, and they're in a pattern of toxic and controlling relationships. And so when they get out of one relationship and they end that because it was toxic, they end up back into another one. Sometimes it's a little less toxic if you're making progress in your own life. You can reduce the toxicity of the relationships going forward. But the bottom line is the women I work with just really are in this pattern. And it's a pattern that they live with day in and day out. And you may think, well, maybe that's just the luck of the draw. And, there's lots of people out there, and these women are just finding themselves with unhealthy people for partners. And that is definitely not what's happening. When something is a pattern like that, it has to do with what you are drawing into yourself if you find yourself in this pattern. And so these women who are really wonderful people who I work with, they keep going back to these relationships. They stay in them, and then they find themselves in new ones. And regardless of the amount of pain or the hurt being inflicted on them, they're staying in that relationship. They're taking responsibility for it. They're thinking they can change it. They're thinking there's something wrong with them. So, and these are women who are smart, they're educated, they're in good jobs a lot of the times, and they've got good friends around them often. So you just really wonder what's happening for her. And so many people will be looking at her and judging her and going, why doesn't she just leave? What is going on with her? I would just leave that guy. And there's a lot of judgment and things like that. But the important thing to know, and the answer to that question, is to why somebody who's so dynamic and amazing and wonderful, like the women that I work with, would continue these toxic patterns in their life. The reason is because the intellect and the emotional life of a person are two separate things. They're two separate entities. So you can have a very bright, competent woman who's a super friend to other people and a super mom, and seemingly doing things that are just totally self-destructive by staying in these hideous, toxic relationships. And the reality is that toxic relationship patterns are addictions. And if you know anything about addictions, you know that we don't control them. They control us, okay? So the first step in any person who's attending AA or any other addiction counseling group, step number one is recognizing your powerlessness, that you are powerless over these addictions. And so using your intellect to change that does not always work. We can use the intellect, and I'll get to that in a minute. But these addictions that we have, no matter what they are, whether it's addictions to these toxic relationships or alcohol, drugs, whatever, they come from early damage. They come from early hurt. They come from trauma to the person. They come from abuse, neglect, living in a dysfunctional family where you're not important and your needs aren't met because the adults aren't capable of meeting those needs. This is where addictions come from. If you are a person who is in an addictive relationship like this with these toxic people, you likely have other addictions as well, because addictions can come in twos or threes. A very common one for women in abusive relationships or toxic relationships, however you want to verbalize that, is an addiction to sugar, sweet things, binging on sweet stuff, craving sweet stuff, or medicating with food, any other kind of food. And I'm actually doing a live on that with my daughter this Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time if you want to get in on that. But that's an aside, and I'll post that in the group and on my personal page to remind you. But these addictions come from this trauma and this early abandonment by parents or parental figures. Now, as an LPC, a licensed counselor, I'm going to tell you that theorists, especially in the Freudian way of thinking, they believe that women especially will get into these relationships in an attempt to replicate the family of origin and get the love and the needs met from the person who was supposed to give that to them in the beginning. And they didn't get it. So now they're going to replicate this relationship with this other toxic person who abandons them and doesn't meet their needs to try to fix what happened in childhood. And that's just a theory from a very psychoanalytic perspective. It's only one theory, but it does seem to hold a little bit of water. It does seem to make some sense. Bottom line is, replicating the situation that caused the problem is not going to solve the problem. You've got to shift and change something within you. You can't get your healing from another person and from the outside. It's not going to happen. So, reliving that situation and trying to get a toxic person to love us is not going to cure. It's just going to make some more crazy in our life. Actually your attraction to these types of people isn't really an attraction. It's your subconscious mind that's fooling you into thinking that you're attracted to the person so that you can use that person to get yourself healed. And it's not going to happen. You're only going to be further harmed. So here's where your intellect comes in. You've got to use your intellect, okay? It's not going to cure the trauma, but you can use it to find a way in to start the healing for your life and the shifting that you need to do, the profound shifting in learning how to parent yourself, learning how to love yourself, learning to have an outstanding relationship with yourself, learning how to let go of guilt and all these other crazy things that come along with this situation that do not serve you and only serve to hurt you and everybody else around you. You've got to learn that you can guide yourself day by day to really get your freedom and never, never, never step into one of these relationships again. And that's when your life is going to take off. That's where you're really going to grow. That's where you're going to see progress and happiness and joy and stability and the feeling of security that comes from your own self. And there's no greater gift than that. Creating your life in a strong identity. And it's really it's simple. It's simple. The cure, the healing is simple, but it's not easy. If you're in one of these relationships right now, the first thing you need to do is what I call a detox. You need to block this person. You need to get free of this person. You need to start living one day at a time. One 24-hour period at a time, just like they teach us in addictions healing, addictions work. You've got to get support. You're not going to do this without community. You can do it and you can white knuckle your way through it and maybe get free of a relationship or two, but you're not going to get the deep healing that you need so that you've got the stability and the love for yourself in your life that's going to prevent you from getting into this again going forward. So you've got to have community and healing your wounds, establishing a firm and solid identity, understanding you're entitled to that, knowing how to defend it, knowing how to take care of yourself and not betray yourself in the future.